We're entering a new console generation and a lot of things are changing. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 5 things that could go extinct with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. Starting off at number 5 is geometry constraints or polygon budgets. Now this is of course a combination of a couple of things coming to fruition. First, the hardware in question is a lot more powerful. We've already seen an example of exactly how that could be. The PlayStation 5 Unreal 5 engine demo showed us Nanite, a technology that a developer by the name of Brian Karras, who worked for Unreal, spent about a decade working on. In order to explain Nanite, I will quickly quote the Unreal Engine website talking about it. Nanite virtualized geometry means that film quality source art comprising hundreds of millions or billions of polygons can be imported directly into Unreal Engine, and it just works. Nanite geometry is streamed and scaled in real time, so there are no more polygon count budgets, polygon memory budgets, or draw count budgets. There is no need to bake details or normal maps or manually author LODs. There is no loss in quality. Now, we haven't gotten an exact process as to how it works, so keep in mind I am very much theorizing. Apparently, what it does is target 90% of rigid geometry and interpolates or scales down or does some degree of change to it that allows for the rendering of what they're calling micropolygons. And let's be clear, this is incredibly impressive. I think it kind of reminds me of shaders in a way, because a shader could achieve various effects that would require very intense modeling or otherwise graphically intensive techniques that are optimized down a little bit. It apparently doesn't even tax the CPU that much. The demo that they showed on the PlayStation 5 apparently was about as difficult for the PlayStation 5 to run as Fortnite would be, which is particularly mind-blowing. And although it does have a couple of limitations, including smaller, what they call porous objects like grass, which don't necessarily work so well with the technique. Still, it just very much seems like that's it. That's the end of polygon limits. At number 4 is 1080p. And we've had 1080p, or what is called full HD, in gaming for a pretty long time now. It's not as if every Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 game had it, but plenty of them did. Most games in this console generation have run at 1080p. And to be frank, the resolution isn't bad or anything. However, 4K is quickly becoming the standard, not just on PC games, but in televisions and in broadcasting, etc., etc. And with technology like what was used in the PlayStation 5 demo that we mentioned in the previous point, we're talking about technology that makes it possible to run things in extremely high resolutions without as much cost to the CPU or GPU. Now, the Unreal 5 demo actually wasn't native 4K. It was running at a lower resolution and upscaled. However, I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't care. There's so much going on screen there. I just don't care. It was output in a higher resolution than 1080p. They said 1440p. And I mean, there's a certain point where, like, if I'm playing a game in the living room on a TV from 12 feet away, I'm not going to be able to tell. Now, if I'm playing a game on PC, maybe a little different. My face is like 2 feet from the monitor, but the point is we're probably not going to be seeing 1080p anymore. Instead, we're going to be targeting probably upscaling to 4K from various higher resolutions than 1080p. And given the fact that we have stuff like AI-powered upscaling now, stuff that does a considerably better job, the results could very easily be considerably better than any upscaling we've seen in the past, at least as an aggregate. We're at a point where tech is just considerably better. At number 3, I kind of mentioned it there, but there's a tech called DLSS that NVIDIA created, which is more or less an AI upscaling technique, which can allow you to run graphics at a resolution about twice as fast as you would without the technique. Now, it is a patented NVIDIA technology, but it is something that has been integrated into DirectX 12 which is something that the Xbox Series X uses. And Sony actually patented a technique that is similar, but this is stuff that just absolutely could not be done on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Now, the reason why is, of course, hardware. I mean, you probably could run the artificial intelligence on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One X, but you absolutely couldn't output enough data because it wouldn't run fast enough. That changes this console generation, as there are multiple cores that can be dedicated to quickly running artificial intelligence networks. NVIDIA actually started making this technology in 2016 and said at that time there just was not any hardware capable of reconstructing 4K images from lower resolution images that could be done at any decent frame rate, including PC technology. However, over the last few years, that's obviously changed. The PlayStation 4 actually currently runs a type of upscaling that's similar, called a checkerboard rendering engine. Both the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 are running off AMD hardware, and AMD is supposedly working on their own solution, or may already have that taken care of and not having shown us yet. Obviously, NVIDIA technology isn't going to be inside consoles that are not using NVIDIA hardware. However, we've entered an era where most likely upscaling is going to make 4K the standard, and the 4K itself is going to be better than it ever has been, and in theory, less taxing on the hardware. At number 2, long loading screens should probably be a thing of the past after this generation of consoles. Frankly, the SSD technology they're dropping into both of these consoles is really, really impressive. And it's not even going to necessarily just change loading screens. You know those parts of games where you have to go through like a narrow passage, squeeze through, and your characters move a lot slower? Yeah, they do that instead of a loading screen because they're streaming in a bunch of new assets. And while I wouldn't necessarily say that is or isn't like good or bad, I don't assign a value judgment to it. It's probably something you'll see less of. I wouldn't expect it to completely go away, because there are times where it actually does help build atmosphere as opposed to help build the actual game world itself. But the technical need for it, I mean, it's basically gone. There was a tech demo of the PS4 Spider-Man world being streamed on the PlayStation 5 hardware to demonstrate how much more proficient the hardware was at loading, and it's not even like comparable. It took less than a second to load, took 0.83 seconds to load in the areas, which you could, I mean, in theory, hide as a cinematic cut of some sort. It's a good chance people wouldn't even notice 0.83 seconds. But also it made it so that you could quicker traverse around an area. Like, they showed the world at a high speed on the PlayStation 4 Pro hardware, and it had significant pop-in at certain speeds, where that was entirely eliminated on the PlayStation 5 hardware. So a lot of places that are in-game and kind of actually mask loading screens probably are done, like as a loading screen device anyways. Again, as far as atmosphere goes, I can't tell you exactly, but gone are the days of annoying loading, I think. I mean, did you see the Ratchet and Clank thing? Between every one of those teleports, there would have had to have been a loading screen. It's just that doesn't exist anymore. Also, for literally the exact same reason, we'll be saying goodbye to long install times. I mean, again, both the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are really impressive in this area, and I cannot wait to play games on these things just for this reason. And at number 1, you'll probably not see games with under 30 frames per second anymore. I know a lot of people think 30 frames per second isn't great, but keep in mind we'll also probably be seeing more games running at extremely high frame rates, like 120 frames per second. Halo Infinite, for instance, is confirmed to be one of such games. But the reason why we're talking about 30 frames per second is actually not a limitation of the Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5 hardware. It's actually a limitation of consumer television hardware. And it has primarily to do with the way that 4K TVs do HDR. Now, this isn't true of all 4K TVs, but more or less most cheap 4K TVs, which is, by the way, the majority of 4K TVs in normal people households. They do a lesser HDR at 60 hertz, but they can push up the quality of the HDR at 30 hertz. So they're more concerned with the visual fidelity than they are with the actual frame rate if they can push it at 30 frames per second and have it look amazing. That being said, again, if we're going to see 120 frames per second in games, you'll need a TV capable of pushing 120 hertz. Otherwise, you could even get weird ghosting artifacts. There are a couple of other interesting problems with buying a TV that will support everything that the consoles support, including these ready for PlayStation 5 TVs that, well, won't actually be ready for PlayStation 5 without a firmware upgrade, without a definitive time frame for when that firmware upgrade will appear for consumers to download. I mean, in theory, the average not completely tech-savvy user may have some difficulty with these higher frame rates. We'll see. However, that being said, the capability is there, and to know that low, crappy, chugging frame rates probably are a thing of the past, that has me pretty stoked. I'm okay if 30 frames per second is rock bottom. That's definitely not the worst thing. Plenty of great games are 30 frames per second. If they can promise that's the consistent experience from now on, or better, I'm there. But how about you? What are these new console changes bringing to your mind? Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe and don't forget to enable all notifications. We thank you very much. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.